Good evening and welcome to the Italian Impact Podcast. I am your host, Steve Stefano Mancini, and as always, I want to welcome my listeners who continue to tune in from all over the world, and I still kind of get excited when I say all over the world, and I don't know why or how they're finding me, but just keep on doing it because at some point I'm going to venture into these countries, and there's going to be somebody on the street, and they're going to say, hey, are you the host of the Italian Impact Podcast? And I'm going to say, well, it depends. Do you like it? And if they say yes, then I'm going to say yes. But anyways, no, all joking aside, I want to thank all my listeners. Appreciate people coming back. You know, we did 100 episodes already. This is 101. As always, I'm trying to bring some great, fun, exciting guests. I always like to use this as a platform for my guests to kind of promote themselves, promote their, their Italian heritage, Italian culture, and whatever else they want to promote. Not everything on this guest 1,000% revolves around the Italian culture, but I would say that certainly gives you a little more likelihood that you're going to be on the show. Having said that, if you are interested in being on the show or you think you have a good guest for me, please reach out at questions@ItalianImpactWeekly.com. That's questions@ItalianImpactWeekly.com. Send me your thoughts, your ideas, suggestions. I do read the emails. I do appreciate the emails that I do get. Nothing goes into the trash. I love reading all of it, so I appreciate all the support. In addition, as the honorary consulate here in Pittsburgh for the Italian government, obviously a lot of folks want to, they want to talk citizenship. I am probably going to have something about this. There has been some new rules that have been quasi put in place, because if you understand the way the Italian government does things, it's not over until it's over. So more to follow, but please go out to the website and, read what is being proposed. There's nothing is etched in stone. There's kind of a, for lack of a better term, a trial period. But for the folks that are listening, if you're interested in getting your Italian citizenship, the Italian government is making it just a little bit more, I don't want to say tougher, but more selective. In other words, the old days of going back to my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather might be over. So more to follow, and I encourage you to go read the law as it is being proposed. Now, with that, I always like to jump right into my guest, because I have a good guest who apparently has informed me that she won't shut up. But don't you worry, folks. If she gets on my nerves, you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to let her keep talking because I'm an old softie. But with that being said, I'd like to welcome this week's guest, Mary Menniti Mary from the Italian Garden Project. I'd like to welcome you to the show. Mary, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to be here, Steve.
I told you, I just jump right in.
Yes, you do.
I don't, and what's funny is now you can tell folks, well, did you practice? Did you guys work? Nah, we pretty much just go right into it because, I do take a little bit of pride in picking the guests. And I know that the folks I'm bringing on are not going to be the one answer guests. I can tell by your expressions that's not going to happen. But Mary, first off, like I kind of said, I want to introduce the folks to who you are. Keep in mind, I can honestly say I've got people in Singapore listening, and they might not know who you are. So tell the folks in Singapore, who is Mary?
Okay. I am the founder of the Italian Garden Project, which is a nonprofit organization that is all about documenting and preserving Italian-American backyard vegetable gardening heritage. So it's all about preserving the lifestyle that revolved around the backyard vegetable garden that was so central to the identity of so many Italian American immigrants, and trying to preserve that lifestyle, trying to document it, record as much as I can about it, audio, video, photos of classic backyard vegetable gardens that still exist. There's many fewer today, but they're still there. And I didn't learn enough when my grandfather used to have that garden, but now it's my goal to learn as much as I can and preserve the tangible and intangible aspects of the garden.
Now let's talk about, you mentioned your grandfather, and you're kind of picking what I'm going to call a little bit of not a little bit, if it's a lot of it, of a niche market. Not folks would think, well, we need to preserve the memories of Italian gardens. Ironically enough, and I'll just mention this before you do all the talking, I grew up being one of those people out there pulling the weeds in the garden, watering the garden in the evening time, talking to my, the old Italian guys that were my neighbors who had their gardens. So I actually appreciate that because it was a labor of love for me growing up. When you're younger, you hate it. And then finally, I think in my teenage years, I finally started to like the kind of the solitude, the peacefulness of, in the evening, you go out there, you water the tomato plants, you pull some weeds. I really missed that. And I didn't, but I did enjoy it. But, having said that, because this has become a passion of yours, I'm going to make a leap of faith that this was something that was a part of your life when you were growing up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was lucky enough to grow up very close to all of my immigrant grandparents, but especially my paternal grandfather, who had come at 16 years old in 1912 from the province of Caserta, from the typical immigrant agricultural background where they survived on what they could grow. So when he came here to make a better life for himself and his family, he, although he worked in the coal mines first and then the steel mills in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, he always kept a garden to feed his family, and fig trees. That was a big part of the garden. So that was the lifestyle that so many of our ancestors came from. They came from agricultural backgrounds, and it was natural for them to keep it up in whatever way they could when they arrived.
Now, did you actually end up spending time in the garden as a kid?
Oh, absolutely. I adored my grandfather, so I tagged along behind him as much as I could. He had retired about the time I was born, so I got to be with him. He would come to where I lived a few miles away, where we had a bigger yard and a couple acres, and my dad got him at retirement a couple sheep and some chickens, so it could, he could really relive the lifestyle that he came from. And so I got to be with him a lot as a young child, and I had the good fortune to witness someone who was completely at home when he was in his garden. There was nowhere else on earth he would have rather been. So I got to experience not only the wisdom that he had about growing things and knowing everything about how to survive by his own hands, but also the peace and joy that he emanated when he was in that garden. So I think that's a huge part of why I wanted to continue this.
Now, did you get that at the time, or was that something you kind of, little introspection later on, and you said, oh, wow, I never realized it?
Right. So I knew I loved to be with him. I loved to, he would, we had lamb, we had sheep, and the sheep had little lambs every year. So I got to take care of them, feed them with a bottle, even bring them to kindergarten for show and tell. So I loved it all, but I didn't really appreciate, I didn't understand that it would be gone one day, that whole lifestyle wasn't going to be there forever. So we always take for granted what we have and think we'll always have. So, that as I grew up, and he got older, he wasn't able to garden as much. And then when he passed, and I then was raising my own children and moving farther and farther away from that lifestyle, and realizing, wow, that was amazing to have had that experience. So yes, the older I got, the more I realized how unique and how lucky I was to have grown up within that lifestyle.
But at least you weren't like a grudging participant growing up.
No,
you just
maybe
didn't.
my brothers were, because they had to maybe do more of that.
Well, as I say, the pulling, the biggest thing I hated, because I grew up in the city, but to your point, everybody had a garden. I don't care how big or small it was, everybody had a garden. And ours, I don't know, it was like a weed magnet. I was just constantly felt like I was pulling weeds, and it was just not fun.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I said, I mentioned, I do recall later on not minding, go out there, especially on a summer evening where the sun's setting, it's a cooler day, and I used to do it the old, I remember I had a coffee can. You'd fill it up with water and you'd pour it, each individual plant, you'd have the little hole, the little depression, and you'd pour the water into the depression, and the tomato plants, I still remember that like it was yesterday. And God, at the time, you don't, it just seems so benign, like, water in the yard. And then now you're like, there's just something, there's a connection. And I think humanity has lost that connection with the environment. You talked about it as being a survival mechanism, but I almost think that there was an emotional attachment there. Do you see that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, especially for the immigrants who came from this lifestyle, left their families, who they worked side by side with in the fields. Now, not to romanticize their lifestyle,
Right.
back there, it was tough, and that's why they had to leave. But if you've ever been to Italy and been outside in the beauty of Italy, and to be able to be immersed in that beauty and nature and working, singing, side by side with your family and working, but also working very hard. But and then coming to the coal mines of Western Pennsylvania, coming to the steel mills of Western Pennsylvania, the smoky Pittsburgh that was, and then when they had a little piece of ground, whatever that was, at their first house that they rented or their first house, to be able to reconnect with that lifestyle that they left, to be able to grow the food that was familiar to them. I mean, they, were struggling with a new language, with people in the steel mill next to them speaking even another language, but they knew the language of plants. They knew how to care for plants. They knew how to grow just about anything. So it brought them back to a lifestyle, at least a little piece of the lifestyle that was familiar, and gave them a sense of connection to the earth again.
No, I can appreciate that, because I mean, the same sun that shines over Italy, shines over Pittsburgh, and to have those roots in the ground. It's funny though when you mention that romanticization. I think a lot of people fall into that trap of looking back and go, they see the Italy now, and they don't understand how much it's changed in a relatively short time frame. And even when those people came over in, say, the early 1900s, they weren't that far removed from when it unified as a country. So when people talk about the United States being a relatively young country, we are. But there are other countries that are younger than us, even though their civilization may be older. The country that we see, Italy, is new. And even when you go there now, there are still very poor regions of Italy. Even go down to Calabria, there's some very poor regions down there. And so working in the fields isn't always like, I can't wait to get out there and work in the hot sun. But when you come over on the boat, and to your point, by the way, you said something else I think gets lost. They weren't just trying to learn English. Like you said, they might have been somebody, next to me, this one's from Poland, this one's from Germany, this one's from Ukraine. We're all working in the mill or the coal mine, and the only unifying language was English. And by the way, none of us speak it very well. So how fun was that? So to go home while, you're coming from maybe dire circumstances, and it's not like I enjoy my, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. coal mine job. There is something, though, that has got to just, that connection.
Therapeutic,
right?
Almost. Yeah, being back, being in the garden, all the sensory experiences, the smell of the earth, and the, working and making, doing something that you can see tangible results, and then you're planting the seeds, you're watching it grow. It's a nurturing, and it's a creative act for them too. So it gave them a lot of escape from the world that they were facing.
Now, what was the actual impetus for you to start this project?
Well, I always credit my grandfather first and foremost as being such an inspiration, and just, I had such an admiration for him. But, that early first wave generation passed, and then I moved to a community where there were a lot of post-World War II immigrants who I didn't know prior to that, and I discovered they were living the same lifestyle that I knew as a child, doing everything from scratch, having huge backyard gardens, growing their fig trees, canning everything. And I just was amazed, and I thought, wow, now I have a chance to pay attention and to learn from these folks. Because one thing that stayed with me from my childhood was my grandfather's message over and over that, your generation, if there was a war, we would starve.
Yes.
He was literally, as much as he was proud of all that his sacrifice by coming to this country and his hard work that his sacrifice gave us, he was also a little bit worried about how far we had come from something as basic as knowing how to grow our own food. So that message stayed with me, like how naive we are to take our food for granted. I mean, way back then they didn't call it food security, but now we know to talk about food security.
Well, it's funny you say that because we do not have survival skills.
Zero.
There are very few people, and the people that have them are probably people that, they're living in the country, they hunt, they fish, they grow stuff, but we've moved away from that agrarian, society,
absolutely.
and we live in cities. And the irony is you look at the food we're eating, and it's literally poison killing us. I mean, it's such a big deal. Politics aside, the current administration has made it a big point to push, hey, food safety matters, because what a coincidence over the last 40, 50 years, all of these kind of new diseases have all of a sudden sprung up. I remember what I ate, and I look at people, all these, like, I'm allergic to this. I'm thinking, when did this happen? And obviously it 1,000% relates to our food that we're eating. So, having lost that, and now people are trying to, quote, eat healthy, but where do you get healthy food from? Even when you go to this market, it's it's organic, or you can't believe anything in the supermarket. So I don't understand when everyone talks about is why there's not more of a push. But do you see a push for people to go back, not go back to that lifestyle, but say, you know what, maybe I can just grow a few things myself and not have to go, for example, in the summertime. If you're going in the summertime and buying tomatoes, it's almost like, why? Just as an example. Do you see anything like that?
Well, it's, I saw during the pandemic there was a big resurgence in interest in gardening. I mean, the seed stores, the companies sold out of seeds. So when there's that awareness brought to the fore about how important our food is, I see it naturally happens. Will it happen if we continue to live in comfort? It's hard to say. But, I think the younger generations are starting to recognize the health benefits, the environmental benefits of growing your own food. And, I think, though, that they're unaware of how much work. I think we're just not used to it. Right. Our culture is not used to how much work it takes to grow our own food. But also, the seeds have big seed companies have narrowed our seed supply.
Right.
So those seeds that our ancestors had really gave us great variety of food that was grown for taste instead of marketability and transportation, being able to be transported. So those seeds that they brought are vital, and that's part of the project. That's part of what I do, is trying to safeguard and collect those seeds that our ancestors brought for decades, for hundreds of years, actually, to seeds that came from their small villages that they thought were too good to be left behind. So those seeds that have been here for decades and grown within our climate are at risk of being lost. And I see that happening every day. So that that's one of the big pushes of my work, is to go around the whole country as much as I can. And that it's grown from a local Pittsburgh project to it's now has a national reach. I was just out in California collecting the bachicha bean, which is a bean that was immigrants from Genoa brought to the Stockton area of California in Northern California. And it was discovered several years ago that bean no longer exists in Genoa and had to be reintroduced from Stockton to Genoa because that seed. So the seeds we have here are really valuable. Sometimes they're not even grown in the villages from which they came. And they give us variety. They aren't agro-industrial seeds. These are seeds of, each little village, sometimes only existing in those villages. So that is a big part of my work. And having access to those seeds, I think, is really, really important. They're our cultural heirlooms, really.
Actually, I want to come back. I want to touch on that. But first, we've got to take a break. Got to pay the bills. All right, we'll be right back with Mary Menniti from the Italian Garden Project.
Ciao, Chrissy. Your Italian got so much better. Brava.
Grazie. It's because I learned the best way possible.
How so?
Well, I learned that with apps, grammar books, and even YouTube videos, I could only get so far. I had to immerse myself. I noticed I did best when I was in Italy visiting family. That's where my level really soared.
And wow, did it work?
Thanks. I became much more confident, fast. That's why I created Footsteps Through Time. It's an Italian language experience. You don't just take Italian classes, you immerse yourself in a real Italian village. With lots of fun activities and excursions, it's life-changing.
I see. So, no more boring grammar, in-person labs, just real conversations, real culture, and delicious food, of course.
Exactly. I'm so excited about this. Learn Italian by actually becoming part of the local community for a week and living it. So if you've been dreaming of Italy and the language, check out Footsteps Through Time in Italy.com. Book now and join the experience.
Andiamo!
Thanks to Greater Pittsburgh Travel. For any of your travel needs, let Tom and the team at Greater Pittsburgh Travel know, and they'll take care of you. For more information, call 412-331-2244 or visit their website at www.greaterpittsburghtravel.com. For all of your plumbing needs, be sure to try Palucci Plumbing. Nick and the team have decades of experience and will get you back up and running. For more information, call Palucci Plumbing at 412-782-5050. And we want to thank the Calabria Club of Pittsburgh. If you're interested in learning more, you can find their contact information on Facebook at Calabria Club of Pittsburgh. Again, thanks Domenica and the team at the Calabria Club of Pittsburgh for your support. And we want to thank La Scuola d'Italia Galileo Galilei, the only nonprofit school in Pittsburgh endorsed by the Italian Consulate. If you're interested in learning Italian or have your children being immersed in the Italian culture and language, be sure to give them a call at 412-404-7070. And that's La Scuola d'Italia Galileo Galilei. We'd also like to thank Chris Gonzalez from the Knights of Columbus. If you have any questions about joining the Knights of Columbus, reach out to Chris Gonzalez at 412-605-9074. All right, welcome back. Mary, before we went on break, we were talking about the preservation of seeds, which ironically enough, there is the big project. I don't know if it's up in like Sweden or somewhere where they actually have this large stockpile of seeds. But I want to ask you, because you were talking about how some of the local villages had local varieties of certain fruits and vegetables, and that's lost. Why did they lose it over there in Italy?
Well, it's the same as here. I mean, Italy's on the same trajectory as we are because fewer and fewer people are farming. The older people who know that lifestyle and all those skills, they're passing, and the knowledge isn't being passed on as it was for, hundreds of years. And even since people started in agriculture, it was passed down orally from one generation to the next. And that's stopped, virtually stopped. And it's stopped here. I didn't learn from my grandfather. I didn't save as many of his seeds and plant material. And it's really the first in history, our generations are the first in history to not have that knowledge passed down. And it's happening here, and it's happening in Italy.
And and it is a danger. When people don't understand the danger of large, quote, corporations of buying up farms. They are literally holding the keys to food. And when you think about that, that means that they can pick and choose how they, quote, modify seeds, because what are they looking for? They're looking for mass production, something that's impervious to certain, whether it's cold or whether it's this way. And it sounds great on the surface. Well, they just want to make a seed that's more resilient. Okay. The problem is that's not necessarily what's meant to be. Now, the seeds that you're collecting, are you literally reaching out to just individuals or like how is the process? Because I'm curious if there's any pushback from any companies, because I know that there have been instances where these large companies have come after smaller companies because things have blown into that way or blown this way, and it screws up the crops. What have you seen that? How are you dealing with getting seeds?
There actually, the EU has stricter regulations about seed saving than we do here, so that I don't have any problem collecting seeds. I just meet people. Like I go to Italian cultural clubs where there's older Italians and just network. I just love to meet people, and one person leads me to another person who might have seeds and in different areas of the country. So I haven't had a problem, and I'm also then, in order to preserve the seeds, I'm working with a seed distributor in Philadelphia called True Love Seeds. So they're actually helping me preserve these seeds, because I can't just, at first I was just collecting them, trying to plant them myself in my garden and give them to some friends to plant. But this is so much bigger than that. This is really an important cultural project, and True Love Seeds is now helping me grow them out. They're getting growers across the country to grow them and save them for seed, and then be able to package them and sell them as to help the work that I'm doing. So, and not just for the to help the work, but also to preserve these seeds, because if we don't continue to grow them, we won't be able to keep them viable.
Now, you said something very interesting. You said the rules in the EU with respect to collecting seeds. Explain that to me, the U.S. versus the EU.
Yes, so large seed companies have restricted the ability for people to save their own seeds. As crazy as that sounds, because that's the way our ancestors had seeds. They didn't go and buy the seeds. Right. They just saved them from one generation to the next. But there's laws and efforts by larger agro businesses to sort of control the seed supply. So it's actually, in certain cases, it's not legal to save your seeds from one year to the next. It's complicated and more technical than that, but thank goodness so far in the U.S. we have less restrictions about seed saving.
That's how do they? Is this just because you can't resell them? They don't want you reselling them and basically cutting into their profits?
Well, if you can't save your seeds every year and you have to rely, you're forced to buy them. Then yeah, even in African countries, it's even worse in some cases.
So the bottom line is these companies want control of your food. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. If I have the seeds, you can't grow the food.
Exactly. When you control the seeds, you control our food supply, and that's.
So how does that work, though? I mean, how do they enforce that?
I'm not really up on all the details of it, but it is a real thing.
But I've heard of lawsuits being filed by these large corporations against smaller farms,
especially against GMOs when the GMO pollen goes into another farm, and then the other farmer, they bring lawsuits, and they're.
I don't even see how the judge can't just dismiss that immediately.
But
I guess if you got money, we know how our.
Yep.
The illusion of equality and fairness in our justice system is, forget it, folks. You have money, you get what you want. That's just the way it works, and that's not limited to the United States. It's just the sad fact that you have to worry about being able to pass down seeds to grow food speaks volumes of how far off the tracks we've become. And the worst part about it is, in my opinion, is, you know what? We've done this to ourselves because we got lazy. We got complacent. We let these skill sets die. We were okay to turn over control to large corporations. And now if they want to stick some, modified toxic down your throat, there's not much you can do about it.
Right. Yeah, our ancestors knew about food security. Their seeds were their life.
That's right. It was survival.
They understand. And that's the message that we've lost because we've gotten so far away from our food supply, from growing our own food, from seeing where our food comes from. There's a disconnect now about how important seeds and our food is.
Now let's talk about you're gathering the seeds. A couple of things I'm curious about is how long can you keep the seeds for?
It depends on the seed itself. I mean, I have folks who write to me and say, "Oh, I found my grandmother's seeds in a box from the 70s, and these haven't been grown since the 70s, and I'm eager to." Wow. And sometimes they write back and show me the picture of the tomato that
actually
they
germinating.
Yeah,
so, wow,
that's
crazy.
I mean, there are records of like 600-year-old seeds that they've found in archaeologists, and they have grown them out, but that's not normal.
Right.
I mean, normally, you really should regenerate your seeds as often as possible, But it's possible, that even if you have one or two seeds that are viable still out of, a bunch that you
figure how many
find.
seeds you're going to get out of a tomato.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So if you can just get one of them to sprout a couple of tomatoes, you could get 30, 40, 50 seeds out of a couple of tomatoes.
And then you regenerate and multiply them every year.
And let's walk through the seed process. I mean, I usually just take the seeds out, put them on a napkin, put them on the windowsill, they dry out, and what am I missing?
Yeah, it's not
It's
rocket
not rocket
science.
science. But people don't do it.
Right. Well, you have to make sure that the seed, the fruit that you're getting it from is not a hybrid. It has to be an open pollinated, like our ancestors were all open pollinated, that, that whatever they planted from the last year would be a clone of what they planted the year before.
So let me ask that. So let's say, for example, I buy a green pepper at Giant Eagle.
Yeah.
I dry them seeds. Am I getting pepper plants?
Depends.
Interesting.
Depends. Yeah, depends if that was, a hybrid. So its parents were, it won't necessarily grow true to form. It might, but it might also be take characteristics of one parent and not the other, and isn't like going to grow exactly.
Now, a couple of questions, because I am actually really interested in this, because again, this goes back to my roots, but I have been paying attention to food. Most people take it for granted. I am telling you, there are no guarantees in this life. To not think that famines can occur is insane. All you've got to do is go pick up a newspaper in different parts of the world, and you don't even have to go back that far. But there's not a time in history when there was not a famine. It is when the water comes from the sky, you're growing it because you don't know if it's going to come back. So with that being said, can folks buy these commercialized seeds?
Yeah, I mean, they can...
do you help folks identify where to go buy them from?
Right. Well, we have
now we're going to get into the project.
Let's
get into the project.
TrueLoveSeeds.com.
Okay.
But there are other, people that are really doing good work in saving seeds from all cultures. There's, I could give you a list of different seed companies, but there are people now who are conscious of how important, being able to buy seeds and then be able to save them year to year and not have to rely on buying them again every year.
Now, do you guys help folks identify? Like, if I reach out to you and say, "Listen, I'm thinking about growing something like this from this region," would you be able to kind of answer those kinds of questions?
Yeah, I could either, if I don't have them, and I often. Even before I started selling them through True Love Seeds, I would always try to share seeds and ask only that, grow them for yourself. Don't use them. Don't ever use them commercially. And also
the seeds or the product?
The seed itself.
Okay.
Yeah, I've had people like with farmers markets, if they want to sell the product or whatever,
Right.
But the seeds, not to sell them commercially, since I went to a lot of trouble to collect them.
Right.
But also, if we ever lost our own supply, that you would promise to give some seed back. So it's just a good way to to assure that the supply stays safe.
Now, are there any? You're in the Pittsburgh area.
I am.
Are there any breeds? Like, I know you kind of gave the example of the one in California that they kind of went back to. Are there any breeds that you've said, "Hey, listen, this," for example, let's say tomatoes, that say were here 60 years ago but aren't really here?
Well, the ones I know have been here as some of these really unusual varieties that I can't find anywhere else. I have some from my friend Mariano Floro from Sewickley. He came from Calabria and has brought his seeds over 60 years ago. And this tomato, it's unique, and I can't find it exactly in any of the catalogs. So it may be an incredibly unique variety that came from his village and was only grown there.
Because I'm making a leap of faith. Because you know what? When you talk about fig trees, they're not native to Pittsburgh.
No, they're not.
So I had one for a while, and I screwed up and left it out one winter, and it died. It was a shame. It was going so nice. Oh man! Because I've seen fig trees not get treated? And like, I know there's one in Philadelphia, I'm thinking of somebody specifically in my family, has one in Philadelphia, doesn't do anything with it, and it survives. Are there variants of fig trees that can survive in Pittsburgh?
Yeah. Well, Pittsburgh, yeah, even Philly's a more mild climate than Pittsburgh. Unfortunately,
I know it is. Right.
It is just a little bit rougher in Pittsburgh, but there are varieties. Like, there's so many different varieties of fig trees. They say there's over 800 varieties. And so part of my work is collecting those trees, which I consider are heirlooms as well. They were trees that were brought by our ancestors, you know, either the first wave or the second wave of immigration, sometimes sewn into the lining of their skirts. I have a great video, oral history of a woman who remembered, she was a 102-year-old woman, but she remembered coming in 1924 with her mother, and her mother sewed this fig branch into the lining of her skirt and then would take it out, you know, during the passage, put it in the little window to get some light, but then always tucking it back in her skirt, because they didn't really know if it was yeah, and
wow.
it made it, yeah, and I have a cutting of that. So,
wow, that's incredible.
And the history. So that's really important to me, to how these trees really speak to our immigrant history. They tell such a story of who our ancestors were, people that cared enough about a tree and the food that it would bring that they would risk bringing it over and planting it in a climate that they knew wasn't conducive to growing, but then figured out how to grow it. So that's really, I really see the fig tree as a symbol of who our immigrant ancestors were, you know, transplanted to a new place and adapting and thriving. So, but yeah, fig trees, Pittsburgh's a rough climate, but sometimes, you know, they're so resilient, just like I always say, just like our immigrant ancestors, that if that tree even dies back on the top growth, if the root system's good, it will.
It's all about the roots.
Always
as long as the ground,
up.
if you can keep the ground from freezing, they'll make it.
Yeah, if it's covered, but sometimes even if it freezes back on the top, if those roots are deep enough, they'll spring back.
What's the most unusual thing you've come across?
Usual plant? Or
unusual, yeah.
Unusual? Boy. Well, I love the variations of all the vegetables that I was not familiar with. I didn't grow up with, but the 5-foot-long Sicilian cucuzza squash.
Yes.
That I had never seen until I visited my friend Antonio Macchi here in Pittsburgh, and he was so proud of that cucuzza squash.
My neighbor had that. There's long green,
and you know, he had brought it from his hometown near Palermo, Santa Lia, and those seeds are precious. You know, those were his pride and joy. And I love those unusual vegetables that I wasn't familiar with.
It was crazy. He used to grow them on the fence between our yards. So by, you know, halfway through summer, the entire fence is covered, you know, with the leaves, and the vines are all through there, and these things are hanging over both sides of the fence.
Exactly.
And my dad used to get so pissed off.
Oh, really? They were
because they were always hanging in our yard, hanging in their yard.
Right. Oh.
But it was funny because his entire yard was a garden. This is in Bloomfield, and I remember he used to say, because part of our yard was like a little patch of grass, and then the rest was the garden, and then there was actually a hopscotch field in the back of the yard, and he used to say that we were wasting our yard because it should have just made the whole thing a garden.
Right. Why
but
have
he
grass?
grew everything. I mean, he grew like, I just remember, I think back to think, I mean, from right at the end of his porch all the way to the fence where it went out to the alley, it was all garden. And he had a fig tree. He would grow those squash on the fence, tons of tomato plants, you know, peas, you name it, it was growing in his garden. I mean, it was, and you know, when you look back, for a city garden, I mean, that was a lot of food that he generated. He probably didn't spend a nickel on vegetables during the entire summer. Probably into the winter if they jarred it.
Exactly. It wasn't like they had these big farms. Now, when I travel out to California, the Italians that landed there and settled, you know, they had more of an
space,
opportunity,
yeah.
and they you know, went into agriculture, built, you know, huge farms and ranches, they call them, and it was, you know, could do things on, you know, a more commercial level and became business people. But here, you know, whatever space they had, you know, why plant grass? You can't eat grass. It didn't make sense to them because they saw food as totally different than we do today.
Well, in hindsight, I've got a big yard right now, and the problem in my yard is there's no fence. It's on the side of a hill, and I get everything from deer to whatever those
rabbits.
I got tons of rabbits, groundhogs going through there, and I'm like, I tried growing a garden. It was okay for a couple times. I find, for me personally, the best thing to do is I have a deck. Put the pots on the deck and just grow them that way because it just keeps the animals from eating them. And now the problem, though, is there's invasive species of insects, which I didn't have those problems growing up in our garden. The lanternflies, the stink bugs, the Japanese beetles, all friends from our folks on the western side of the Pacific that have no natural enemy. And I remember one year, it was about maybe 5 years ago, I had a gigantic thing of basil that I was going to grow. The next day I went out and looked at it. They had eaten. It was swarmed. I mean, I cannot describe how many I'd say. Swarm with Japanese beetle, and they ate it down to the nubs.
Oh my goodness.
I was so pissed off.
Yeah.
And there's nothing I can do about it.
No.
So I never grew the only thing I can really grow, because I know they don't like it, are things like peppers and tomatoes. They won't eat those. So like, thank God, because I do. Yeah. But I can't grow anything like sweet outside. I just can't now with the insects.
Yeah, people do get frustrated now. Even the gardeners, who grew up with this lifestyle and have been gardening forever, get discouraged because there's so much animal pressure, insect pressure that they didn't have in Italy. Right. And they see.
Well, we didn't even have them here 20
more.
Years ago.
Right. They see more and more every year. And, there's less, the animals are pushed into residential areas. There's just less forest area now, but it can be discouraging. But even like you said, grow a tomato on your porch. Grow some basil in a pot. Just something, house, because it makes a difference. It
feels good
so
eating
good.
your own, right?
Exactly.
Plus, you know what? You didn't spray it with anything. You took care of the soil. I don't know. You just feel like it's right to eat this. Then you go to the store and you're like, that's the perfect looking tomato. That's not from nature. Right. Because that's not what they look at. It's the perfect large giant green pepper. You're like, there's just something wrong with it. I don't know how to put my finger on it, because I grow peppers too, and they're not as big and they're not as pretty looking, but they're right.
Right. No, exactly. I think we know what's good for us inherently.
We do. I think it all connects. Mary, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you.
We went longer than I expected. No, just
I told you, when I start talking about my work,
That's it. You're done. Cut. No, just kidding. But no, seriously, I think it was a really good conversation, because I don't think people appreciate. It's one of these things, you're not going to appreciate it till you lose it. And when you're forced to go into these stores and buy that processed, even the vegetables are unhealthy for you now, because one, they're all genetically modified. They're all treated with some kind of chemical. They're all sprayed with something to keep them nice and shiny. You cannot tell me eating that is good for you. And you can rinse it all you want. It's being absorbed into the food. So I do think you need to get back. We need to get back to, even if it's a couple of pots in the summertime, and it's not rocket science. A couple of pots, go buy a couple of tomato plants from the local lawn store, get some seeds, something, throw them in there, water it tomato plants you better be watering every day. Peppers you can get away with every couple of days, depending on how dry your soil is. Just some tips there for you. But I think it's worth your time to do. I think anybody's listening, it's worth your time to do it. You want to feel the fruits of your labor. That's the truest way to feel the fruits of your labor, by eating something that you yourself grew. The good Lord's help.
Exactly.
Mary, where can folks go learn more about you?
I have a website that I use as sort of a window into the larger archive that I've developed over the years. It's www.theitaliangardenproject.com.
All right, and I always put that in the description. Now, before we head out, any last final words you want to share with folks about the project, about yourself, anything?
Yeah, this has been a grassroots project, and now I really am trying to convert it into a national project, really the national organization for the preservation of Italian-American gardening heritage. It's a long name. We'll still use the Italian Garden Project, but this really needs to be a national effort. This is so much a part of our cultural identity that's been overlooked, and So I'm having a Fig Fest. I have a celebration as one of my major fundraisers of the year that'll be in Pittsburgh in September.
I like figs, Mary.
Yeah, fig. It's a celebration of this symbol of who our ancestors were, and it'll be a true Italian festival where we have our gardening elders teaching us how to cure olives, how to grow fig trees, how to make wine the old school way.
When is that?
That is in September.
Sold.
14th.
It's the olives that I'm interested in.
Yes, how to cure olives. Yeah, we're partnering with Velazzi's restaurant and Mondo Italiana, Viviana Altieri. So it'll be a combination of lots of people really celebrating Italian culture.
All right. Mary, I appreciate your time. This was actually very interesting, very enlightening, and then kind of brought me back some memories.
Great.
I do miss it. I'm actually going to be there in September.
Yay.
The curing the olives is very interesting because, crap, we're not done. I got another question for you. All right. Can you eat olives right off the tree?
There is one variety that's very rare of an olive if it's left on through the winter, and but 99% of olives need to be cured to be edible. You can't pick them right off a tree, but
It's not edible.
not edible.
Not that it tastes bad. You just can't eat it.
Well, it just tastes so bad you can't eat
I
it.
know, but it's not like toxic, not edible.
No.
Okay.
It wouldn't hurt you if you could eat it,
If
but
you could
it's
stomach it.
so bad, and it's so easy to cure them, and they're so good.
Is this like a brine solution?
Yeah, there's all different ways, but when you taste one that you've cured yourself as opposed to what you can buy in the store, you'll never want to buy another one again.
Interesting. By the way, this is called bonus material for the people that heard me say, thanks, Mary, we can learn more. And they immediately tuned off. Well, for you folks that stuck around, I'm going to ask another question. All right, so curing olives, is that, like I said, is it simply a brine solution, or is there more to it than that for the initial?
Well, there's a way to cure them that just with water. In 2 to 3 weeks, you can cure an olive with just water by cracking the olive. You actually crush the olive, take the seed out, soak them overnight every evening, and dump the water out in the morning. Put fresh water. Do that for 2 weeks. Leach out all the really bad tasting parts of the olive, and you have a cured olive. It's not that hard.
But that's not going to be the same taste as the ones that you would say buy in the can that are.
No, they won't taste anything like you buy them in the can.
You know what's funny? Because I was going to say, I don't know that I've ever had a truly, because the problem is when you buy olives, you're buying them under two circumstances. One, you're either buying it in the can,
right,
which I don't mind. I like them.
They're a different thing.
But then, or you go to, like, say, these Italian stores, and they've got, giant olives stuffed with garlic or something. And I'm thinking, that too is probably not right, because they probably got the vinegar in there, or maybe not the vinegar, but like oil in there. They've got maybe some pepper, something in there that you're still not tasting the pure olive. So I would love to know what an actually cured olive tastes like.
Yeah. No,
I'm kind of excited now.
Yeah,
I love olives.
Truly, they are so good. They're a totally different flavor when you cure them yourself. You can get them to taste more like the store if you want by adding things, but
right.
there's a particular taste to a
because all it is water. I mean, would you just water?
Well, to leach out but then you can add some olive oil. You can add whatever
for
flavorings you want. Add salt.
But once you've done that, say 2 weeks of the leaching out all of the I'll call the bitterness. It's not going to taste anything like the nasty bitterness if you took it off the tree, obviously.
Oh no!
But it's not going to taste like it's out of the can either, because it's not that salt added solutions.
Right. It's a totally different experience.
How long do they stay good for if you don't do anything to them?
Well, if you mean once you process
them? So the 2 weeks is up, and I've got it. All right. And I drain all the water out now.
Drain the water.
Okay.
You can then, to preserve them, you can put them in a crock with salt and water. And
there's your brine solution.
Right.
Okay. Right.
But then you take them out. If they're too salty, you just keep rinsing them and soaking them to get down to just a bit of.
But they never really lose their flavor then at that point, do they?
No, they're very flavorful. Taste like real olives.
Now I'm going to go home and eat some olives.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know how to explain it to you. I love olives.
Yes.
There are people that are just so grossed out. I'm like, I don't get it.
No.
I think olives are delicious.
And they're good for you.
That's right. Well, my cousin in Calabria has an olive farm, so he fresh olive oil, and every once in a while I'll order a case from him. And it is from tree to press to bottle. There's no stop. So when you get, and I love to get the fresh press. So it's got a little more of the particulate in it. Particulate, right? So it's got a little bit more of that in it, and it's just so different. I don't think people don't understand the flavor that they're missing when you buy the processed stuff, because we add sweetener to everything. Everything has some type of sugar, something that ends in either syrup, some kind of os, dextrose, sucrose, whatever, or just plain old sugar, and it totally sweetens it, and it's not what the real flavor is.
Yeah. No. Olive oil from Calabria or anywhere in Italy is just a treat.
Even Greek olive oil. I'll give the Greeks some credit.
Oh, yeah.
I'll give the Greeks some credit on this
too.
But yeah, no, fresh pressed olive oil is not what you get when you go to the restaurants in America. They're just not. They're not gonna buy it in bulk. But when you have it, to your point, once you eat something fresh, you don't want to go back.
Exactly. Every time
I'm going to call Rosario and order some more olive oil.
Yeah. Everything I cook in Italy tastes better than what I cook here. It's the salt, it's the water, it's the olive oil, it's everything.
Ho fame adesso. Voglio mangiare adesso. Sì. All right, everybody, listen, now the bonus material is up. Mary, we're done. I'm going to put the link into your site on there. I want to follow up with you because I definitely want to be at the event. I am so curious to see a few of these things. And also, I might be hitting you up for some seeds. Let's talk.
Yes.
All right, Mary. Thank you very much. Final thoughts. Now it's your final thought.
Final. Just thank you, Steve, for allowing me to be here. It was fun to talk with you. I'm so glad for what you're doing to promote Italian culture. I really appreciate it as well.
I appreciate that. I love doing this. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it, because I'll tell you what, this is a pain in the ass to stick around. No, I'm good. I'm kidding. All right, Mary, thank you again. Folks, everyone that's tuning in, please come back in about a week or two whenever I have my next guest. I think it's going to be 2 weeks because I'm in New York next week. I'm going to be at a nice event showing the documentary, Fedelta, Soldier Prisoner. I know you're tired of hearing me say it, but if you haven't seen the documentary, please go watch it, because this is the 80th anniversary. The children of the prisoners are going to be coming back to Letterkenny Army Depot to go to the chapel. So if you haven't had a chance to go out there and visit the chapel, I really encourage you to go do it. It's a beautiful chapel, and I really appreciate the hard work that the folks out there in Franklin County are doing to preserve this chapel. I mean, this is something that could have easily been lost many years ago, but they said, no, this story is important. This chapel is a legacy of the story. So I encourage you, please check out the documentary, Fedelta, Soldier Prisoner, on Amazon Prime. And then when you're done, make plans to go out to Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, and see that chapel. I promise you, you're going to love it. Having said that, I want you to have a wonderful and blessed week, and I will see you or hear you on email or something when I do. Take care and God bless.